Okay. So I just would say that I just left. We have a reunion tonight of the men's trip from South Carolina. We have 40 men in a restaurant, and I said to them, I'll be back. I just have to take care of something, you know. So I left 40 guys who completed, 5 sessions of learning together, and I'm gonna come back. So tonight we're dealing with what I sent an email out that I believe this to be really what Rav Noach Weinberg, who was a genius in sharing the beauty of our Torah and our heritage. He had a class, and I think this really was his signature tune. It was called The 5 Levels of Pleasure. And it was so profound that when I came to Aish HaTorah myself, when I came looking for Judaism and looking for truth and meaning, and this is what he presented, and it really touched my soul when I was 17, 18 years old. But at the same time, it's what touches everybody in this generation, because I believe this is what everybody needs to hear. So let's get right into it. That according to Judaism, there are 5 different levels of pleasure, meaning all the pleasures in the world that you can experience can really be divided up into 5 different levels. And we're going to explore those levels in this class and in the next class. Now, really, the reality is that the levels of pleasure that one can experience in life can be compared to traveling in an airplane. Right? Meaning, when you travel in an airplane, how would you like to travel? Of course, we like to travel first class, right? Isn't that right? Wouldn't you like to travel in an airplane first class? Now, if you can't travel first class, what would you travel? Well, we won't call it second class because that sounds bad. Like you're a second class citizen doesn't sound good. So second class doesn't. So let's call it business class or executive class or ambassador. If you can't travel first class, you'll travel as an executive, as an ambassador, right? So that's second class, right? What if you can't get into the business? So what do you do? We don't want to call it third class because third class are really bad. That's called tourist or coach or economy. You're saving money, right? So that's third class. Now, whatever you can't travel third class, you know what you do? You travel, they'll put you, with the luggage and with the animals. Sometimes they have little dogs and chimpanzees and so forth. You can travel down there. It's not such a great trip, but that's fourth class. And what if you can't travel fourth class? You know what they do? They give you a rope, right? You hold on to the rope for dear life, and you travel from wherever you want to go to wherever you go on it with a rope. That's really low level traveling, right? Now in life, how do we want to travel through life? We want to travel through life first class, right? First class. But some of us don't really know how to travel through life first class. And we end up traveling through life with a rope, struggling onto life for dear life, And sometimes, God forbid, you can let go. We don't want to travel through life that way. So what we want to understand now is what are the different 5 levels of pleasure, and in every level of pleasure we can understand there's a real pleasure and there's a counterfeit pleasure. But let me ask you, ladies, you see, many of you have children. What do you want your children? What pleasures do you want your children to have? Right? You want them to have good food. You want them to have vacations. You want them maybe to play tennis, to enjoy good music. You want them to enjoy life. But as they get older in life and they become marriageable age, it's not enough just to play tennis. You want them to settle down. You want them to get a good job. You want them to be accomplished. You want them to have family, right? Because imagine, if you have your 35-year-old children and they're playing Space Invaders the whole day. Now, Space Invaders can be, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. But if that's where your 35-year-old child is that's what he's doing the whole day, it just doesn't quite cut it. You want them to settle down, to have a family, to have accomplishments. It's not enough, right? So That's the same as the Almighty wants for us. He wants to have tremendous pleasure in life. Now imagine if you realized there was some tremendous pleasure out there that you didn't know about until now. Wouldn't you want your children to have that as well? Isn't that what you want? So we understand that the Almighty, who created the whole world, he understands what pleasure is really all about. And he wants us to have the most exquisite pleasures in this world and in the next. That's what Judaism is all about. Now, we mentioned last time, in the 4 misconceptions, we mentioned this idea, and I'll just repeat it very quickly, that when we serve the Almighty, it's not because the Almighty, that God, needs our service, right? It's not that when we pray and we say that God is great and he's mighty and he's awesome, that God goes, yippee, woohoo, I was feeling a little bit down today. And now if everybody says, holy, 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 I really feel good. That's not what it's about. The Almighty is an infinite being. He doesn't need anything. When we serve the Almighty, it's not because he needs it. If it's not for him, who is it for? It's for us. And we have to always remember that when all of our Judaism and all of life is to allow the Almighty to give to us. And even more than that, and we said this last time as well, that in order to achieve that tremendous pleasure, he gave us a Torah. And the Torah means Torat Chaim, it's instruction manual for living. The Torah is the instruction manual how to get the most pleasure out of life. 613 mitzvahs, 365 negative, 248 positive. These are all ways for us to grow and to become full people so that we get the most pleasure out of life. Because what the Almighty, as a parent, wants for us, what do parents want for their children? They want their children to be happy and to have pleasure in life. And that's what the Almighty wants for us. He wants to have us to have the greatest pleasures in this world and in the next. And that's what Judaism is all about. Now, we have to understand, and this is an important point in understanding pleasure in life, is that for every pleasure, there's a counterfeit pleasure that kind of feels like the real pleasure, but it isn't. What's a counterfeit pleasure? You know what a counterfeit pleasure? It looks like the real thing, but it isn't. What's that analogous to? It's to counterfeit money. Imagine if someone put on your doorstep $100,000 for you, just for you. You go, wow, that's fantastic. What would you do? You pick up the $100,000, you go to Tiffany's, you buy 5 watches, you still got $90,000 left. You feel like you're on top of the world until you leave Tiffany's, and then you know what happens in the end when you leave Tiffany's? There's the police. Yeah, the police. They put you. They put on the what is it? The armbands. What is it called? They get you. They put you in prison, right? Why? Why? You were doing so well because it was counterfeit money, and that's a crime. So what you thought was good for you, right? That you were getting $100,000 and it sounded so promising and so wonderful. In the end, you end up worse than before you had the money because it was counterfeit. If it's counterfeit, you'll end up much worse than you were than before you even had it. That's the same for pleasure. Every level of pleasure, we're going to go through 5 levels, has a counterfeit. And that counterfeit looks like the real thing. Now we're going to define each one and what's the real and what's the counterfeit. Right? So we can know it clearly. But we have to understand there's such a thing as a counterfeit pleasure. When you get into the class that we're going to do in a few weeks' time on free will, you'll understand that counterfeit pleasures were created so that you have free will. So you can choose between the real thing and the counterfeit thing. And by doing that, you earn more and you have a sense of accomplishment. So we'll get to that later. My dear friend and colleague, Rabbi Simcha Barnett, is going to teach that and share that with us. And it's a fantastic class from our teacher, Rav Noach Weinberg. But in the meantime, you have to understand that every level of pleasure has a counterfeit. It looks good. It's luring. It promises something really great. But really, you know what happens if you go for it? You're going to end up much worse than you were in the beginning. right? So imagine if someone said to you, you know what, I can make, a few $1,000,000 for you, right? Just invest 50,000 in, in me, and I'll make you a few million. You wouldn't do it unless you understood, does it make sense? Check it out, right? Does it really make sense? That's the same thing. The counterfeit pleasures are luring. They're saying, come on, invest in me. I'm going to give you tremendous pleasure. Check it out, because maybe it's counterfeit. So we're going to, and unfortunately, in this generation, many people, whether they're religious or they're not religious, they're going for the counterfeit pleasures because they're luring and they think that's going to give them real pleasure. But really, where do they end up? Much worse than they were before. So just realize. Now, a second point that you have to realize for all levels of pleasure is that all levels of pleasure, you need to become a connoisseur in pleasure. Just like, and I don't know if any of you have taken wine tasting courses, right? But if you want to become a connoisseur in wine, you have to learn, you have to take a course. You have to learn that it's much more than just the liquid that wets your tongue, but there's a whole variety of pleasures. There's the bouquet, there's the color, there's the texture. It goes on certain taste buds, So, we are a little bit barbarians, most of us, when it comes to learning to tasting wine. But if you're a connoisseur, whoa, that wine tastes so delicious. So for every level of pleasure, you have to understand, you have to become a connoisseur. I mean, you can walk through a field and miss and a beautiful expanse and a valley and a field and a beautiful mountain, and you can miss the whole thing because you're not focused on what's the pleasure in front of me. You don't want to go through life and miss the pleasures that are available to you. You have to become a connoisseur in each and every level. So we want to start now, based on that, with what is the fifth level of pleasure, right? Now, I don't know if anybody out there, I know, Aliza, if you can let anybody speak here, or there's a chat. Unfortunately, I'm on my phone, so it's harder for me to see all the chats. But what would you say is the lowest level of pleasure? You can unmute. What would you say if you unmute? What would you think is the lowest level of pleasure? Anybody got any ideas? What do you think is the lowest level of pleasure? Any ideas from you? Anybody be so bold as to unmute and give their opinion? What do you think is the lowest level of pleasure? Of 5 levels of pleasure? Okay, so I'll tell you. This is the lowest level. The lowest level of pleasure is physical and material pleasures. Now, we're going to try to understand that. So let's deal with them. It's really A and B, physical and material. Let's deal with physical to start with. That in the world at large, you see, there's two attitudes to physical pleasure. One is the attitude of the ascetics. The ascetics, those who are Buddhists, they go into a mountain and they say the following understanding, that, if spiritual pleasure is what's going to give you the real pleasure in life, you know what you have to do? Stay as far as possible away from physical pleasure, because that's taking you away from spiritual pleasure. And the reality is that's part of Christianity as well, that the priests, who are the holy people, they don't get married, because if you want to get married, you're being too involved in the physicality, and that's bad and it's evil, so you don't get married. If you're a priest, if you're a very holy person, right? That's one approach. If you want to have real spiritual pleasure, stay away from physicality. Going onto a mountain and fast and be an ascetic, and you will have the greatest pleasures. That's one approach, right? Now, what's Western society's approach? You know what Western society's approach is? That, listen, let's just be honest. We're all friends here, right? A person who's secular, you go into a McDonald's and you have a Big Mac. Yeah. You have a hamburger and it's great. And it's got all the sauces on it, and the tomato ketchup and the tomato ketchup. I forgot which country I'm in. The tomato ketchup. I'm sorry about that. I let myself slip there and I said tomato. Please forgive me. Right. So you have the tomato ketchup, and you have the different, the mayonnaise, and you have the dill, and you have and one of those is good. Imagine if you had 10 of those. If you have 10 of those, isn't that going to be a tremendous pleasure? So that's more of a hedonistic approach. That's Western society, is the more physical pleasure you have, the more pleasure you'll have, right? So where is Judaism? Judaism denies both of these, right? Judaism is not ascetic and we're not hedonistic. What do we say? That, you know what? The world was created by God. It's not bad, right? It's good. And in fact, the Talmud says that a person will be taken to task in the world to come if there was a fruit that you could have eaten that you didn't eat. Hashem will say to you, you know, why did I created this for your pleasure? Why didn't you have the mango, the kiwi fruit, whatever fruit it is, right? Why didn't you? I created it for your pleasure. Judaism looks at the physical world as being good. But what? But you know what? What Judaism says is don't indulge in physicality. Why not? Not because by indulging in it, not because we don't want you to have pleasure, because Judaism recognizes how do you get pleasure from the physical world? You know how? You use the physical world as a means to an ends and not an ends and in itself. Meaning that you go to sleep at night, right? Not so that you can sleep and sleep and sleep. You go to sleep at night so that you can wake up in the morning and bounce out of bed and have energy. The sleeping, the physical act of sleeping is so that you can have more energy to live life to the full. You eat, not so that you can eat and eat and eat and just have as many steaks down in your throat as possible. It's you eat so that you can have energy, so you can do meaningful things with your life. A person has a physical relationship between a husband and wife. It's not the physical relationship as it ends in itself. That's demeaning. That's a person has a relationship with a prostitute. Come on, that's demeaning. That's not there's something very lowly about them. But if you have it as a means to express your closeness, your love to each other, wow, that's profound and it's spiritual. So what's the point here? That when you use the physicality as an ends, as a means to something higher, then it gives you pleasure. But when you use it as an ends in itself, that's when you feel sick to your stomach. So imagine you have a bag of chips, right? You have one chip, it's great. You have another chip, it's great. When you get to the point that you're eating the chips as an end in itself, that's where you start losing the pleasure. As soon as it becomes an end in itself, right, you just lost the pleasure. When you use it as a means to something higher, it'll give you pleasure. And that's what the Almighty wants. So physical pleasure is learn to enjoy it, right? Be a connoisseur of the different tastes and pleasures and physical pleasures. They're beautiful and Hashem wants us to have them. But use them. Realize that all physical pleasure is so that you can have that physical pleasure, that it gives you energy. That's what the beauty of physical pleasure gives you energy, so you can go on to do something higher with your life. Now that's dealing with the aspect of physical pleasures. But we said that this first level pleasure is physical and material pleasures. So let's understand now, how do you get material pleasure in life, right? Material. So really the reality is that this pleasure of material pleasure is really bound up with with what it means to be happy in life. But before we give over this idea of what it means to be happy, I want to share with you a beautiful concept that Rabbi Weinberg used to teach about definitions. So he told a story, and a very profound story, and this is one of his most famous stories, right? And I'll share it with you. That a guy came into his office in Jerusalem, in the old city, and he said, Rabbi, I want to tell you something. I traveled through the whole of Israel, north to south, east to west. They say this land is a holy land. I saw it all. There's nothing holy about this land. I went everywhere. I didn't see anything holy. So Rabbi Weinberg, in his incredible wisdom, said to him, let me ask you a question. He said, sure. He said, on your travels, how many befufsticks did you see? So the guy goes, how many what? Rabbi Weinberg says, and he repeats himself, how many befufstiks did you see? The guy says, listen, Rabbi, he says, you got to tell, what's a befustik? Rabbi Weinberg says to him, wait, listen, I'm asking the questions here. Yeah, I'm asking you once and for all, how many befufstiks did you see? The guy starts getting frustrated. And he says, Rabbi, if you don't tell me what a befufstik is, how can I tell you how many I saw? Rabbi Weinberg looks at him in the eye and he says, tell me something. Do you have a definition of holiness that you can say that you traveled north and south, east and west, and you didn't see anything holy? If you don't have a definition of what holiness is, maybe what were you expecting? Colorful lights to appear in front of you, an angel to tap you on the shoulder, an experience of God. If you don't have a definition for holiness, maybe it was right in front of your eyes and you didn't even notice. So this is what Rabbi Weinberg is a profound idea for important things in life. This is the A of Judaism. We need to have definitions. We have to have definitions. So for example, everybody wants to be happy in life, right? But you know what happens? People don't define what does it mean to be happy. So you know what they do? They decide in their own mind, you know what? If I work my way up the corporate ladder, then I'll be happy. Or if I get married and I have a nice house, then I'll be happy. Or whatever it is. And you know what? They'll spend 20 years of their life chasing the things, working their way up the corporate ladder and chasing the things they want. And guess what? They get there and guess what? They're still not happy. Why? Because they didn't take the time to define what is the definition of happiness. Don't chase after something which you don't know whether it's really going to give you happiness or not. For 20 years of your life, don't invest in that if you don't really know if it's really going to give you the pleasure that you're looking for. Better start from the beginning and define what is the definition of happiness, and then you'll know what it is and you can go and get it. So this is what we're going to deal with now. That's the befufstiks lesson. So we're going to now deal with what is the definition of happiness. And we have as one of the idea shares that we're sharing with you, and Elisa has it there that we'll share with you. What is the definition of happiness? An idea share. We want to share with this with you now, and you'll be able to share it with others over the next 2 weeks before the next class. Here it is. Elisa's putting it out, and we'll share with. I'll send it to you by email as well. What is the definition of happiness? So let me take you through it. So a lot of people say that happiness, you can't define happiness. It's an emotion. Well, Judaism doesn't say that. Judaism says you can define it. So let me share with you let me take you through how we understand what it means, what's the definition of happiness, and how we derive that from human experience. See, if I offered any one of you here $1,000 for your eyes, $1,000, it's a nice amount of money. Would you take it for your eyes? No, Rabbi, of course not. Okay. I'm going to up the ante. I'll give you $1 million. Come on, $1 million. You know what you could do with $1 million? Rabbi, come on, my eyes. So how about $100 million for your eyes? No. My eyes are worth more to me than any money. Okay. So now I say to you, my dear friends, how do you feel that you have eyes? You know what you say to me? The same miserable person I was before you asked me that. It's like, okay, good. You tell me you have eyes. I knew I had eyes. So come on, get off my back. It's like, I don't feel so great. I had a bad day. So I say, wait a second. Let's go through this. You just told me that your eyes are worth more to you than any money. So imagine if I came to you, and I don't know if you know about this about me, but I'm a well-to-do person, and I take a liking to you. And I come and I see you and I say, my dear friends, here you are, I'm going to give you, Liana, I'm going to give you this, I have a briefcase with me, and I'm going to give it to you. You open up the briefcase, Liana, and you look inside, it has $100 million. Oh, let's put in $1 million, even $1 million, right? $1 million. How do you feel, Liana? How do you feel, Liana, if it was really true and I gave you $1 million for free and you walk off, you know how you'd feel, Liana? You'd feel like $1 million, right? You feel like $1 million, right? Yeah, that's great. You do a jig down the street. But then when I say to you, Liana, you have eyes. How do you feel? What? So how do we understand this? You told me your eyes are worth more to you than any money, than $100 million. But somehow when I say to you, you have eyes, how do you feel? You say, I don't know. So what's the problem? There's something very wrong over here. You know what it is? The problem of life is we get used to what we have. We got used to our eyes. We got used to it, even though our eyes are worth more to us than any money. But you know what happened? We got used to our eyes. So you have to realize, if you can get used to your eyes, they're worth more to you than any money. You're going to get used to the new house, the new car, the new wife, the new baby. It doesn't matter. If you can get used to your eyes, you're going to get used to everyone. Imagine a person who gets a brand new Porsche and he feels fantastic. Come back in a month, he's the same miserable person. He got used to his Porsche, right? So the trick in life is, how do we not get used to the things that we have? That's the trick of happiness. How do we not take things for granted? And that's why in Judaism, we wake up in the morning and we thank God. The first thing we say is, Modeh ani lefanecha, thank God that I'm alive. That's the first thing that we say. And we go through brachas, blessings, and we thank God I have a mind, and thank God that I have arms, and thank God I have legs, and thank God that I can move, and thank God I can see, and thank God that I have a brain. We thank the God Hashem 100 times a day. You're supposed to say 100 blessings. Why? Because it takes effort to appreciate what you have, right? It's much easier to go through life and focus on everything negative. We have a propensity to doing that. It's much easier to get up in the morning to say, you know what? Oh my gosh, I didn't ask Hashem to be alive and to, and you know what I have to do today? Oh my golly gosh, I have to go on the subway into Manhattan, and all those people on the subway, and they look so miserable, and I get to work and everybody bothers me and they don't like me, and I have to deal with my boss, and then I come home I have to deal with my husband, and he always gives me such a hard time, and then my children. Oh my gosh, what a terrible life. I didn't ask to be born. It's much easier to do that than to go through life and say, you know what, thank God that I'm alive. I didn't have to wake up. Some people don't wake up the next morning. And you know what? Thank God there's a system that I can take a train to work. Imagine otherwise I'd have to walk. And I go to work, and those people, they put up with me and all the issues that I have. And thank God my boss, he keeps me, he gives me a job, and he keeps me employed. And even with, I don't do such a great job, but and I come back, my wife, bless her, she's a tzaddiker, she's a righteous, and, I'm not I'm the good husband. And you know what? She sticks with me. And my children, thank God I have such wonderful children. It's much easier to wake up and be negative. So what we have to do is build that muscle. So you see, that reality is that a person that was blind and could see for the first time would be ecstatic. It's ecstatic. The colors, the beauty. Wow. We have to appreciate that we are much more than a blind person who can see. We're not seeing for the first time. We've been seeing for our whole lives. That's much a greater gift. So we have to, but what's the problem? We got used to it, right? So happiness is the pleasure that you have when you appreciate the multitude of things that you have, right? What's misery? The definition of misery is to go through life focusing on everything that you don't have and everything that you went wrong. We all know people like that, and it's also true for ourselves, that we go through life and say, this didn't happen right. I lost my Parker pen, and this didn't go well, and then you're miserable. The reality is that you have to appreciate that every single one of us has eyes that are worth more than any money. We have ears, we have a nose, we have a heart, we have hands, we have limbs, we have legs, we have feet, we have brothers, we have sisters, we have family, all worth more to us than any money. You understand that? Well, Rabbi Weinberg used to say a beautiful and profound line that I still work on every day, that every single one of us is a walking multi-billionaire, even if we don't have a penny to our names, because we have so many things that we have that are worth more than any money. Each one of us, do we realize that? Every morning we should wake up and do a jig down the street, because we are walking multi-billionaires, even if we don't have a penny to our name. And that's the definition of happiness. And that's the first level, the fifth level. We call this the fifth level of pleasure. That's material pleasure, is appreciate what you have. Now, what's the counterfeit of this fifth level of pleasure? We said material, physical, and material. The counterfeit of physical pleasure is indulgence. Instead of saying to yourself, you know what, I'll have enough physical food and then I'll use it for energy. I'm confused by the Western concept, and that our body in some ways is telling us, just indulge, it's getting more and more pleasure. It's not. As soon as you start indulging, you feel sick to your stomach. You don't feel the pleasure anymore. And what about material pleasure? The counterfeit of material pleasure is just amassing more and more money, more and more. The more I have, the more I'll pleasure. It's not true, because the more you get, right, the more greedy you will be, and the more dissatisfied you'll be. The trick is to appreciate the material pleasures that you have. Learn to appreciate what you have, and even if you don't have a penny to your name, have tremendous pleasure. So that's fifth level of pleasure. That's the lowest level of pleasure. Now we're going now on to the next level. What's the next level of pleasure? Fourth level of pleasure. So what's that pleasure? The fourth level. This is the pleasure that most people think is their greatest pleasure, right? It's what the songs are all about. Now, we understand that really each level of pleasure is not exchangeable. So however much money you have, it doesn't give you the pleasure of the next level. So what's this next level of pleasure? Next level of pleasure is pleasure. It's in Hebrew, it's called banim, children. It's the pleasure of love, right? That's what the next pleasure, meaning it doesn't matter how much money I would give you. Let's say I would give you, $100,000, and then we would take your children away. You'd never see them again. They'd be doing fine. We'll take them to a nice island. They'd have a great time. You just never see them again. You'll never hear from them then. You wouldn't do it. It doesn't matter how much money did I give you, right? But you just say, even if they're doing great, the love that I have for my children is worth more than any money. That's the next idea, Shep. Right, we're going to come on to that. We didn't quite get there yet, Elisa, but the next idea. So the second level pleasure, or the fourth level pleasure, is called banim, which means love, right? So imagine a person who you just offered, I'll offer you, $500,000 for your children. And you say, no, what are you talking about, Rabbi? I want my children worth more. So imagine the guy who just turned down $500 million, let's say, for his children, right? The next time he sees his children, how does he feel? He's, oh my gosh, you know what? I spent all my life trying to work for a living to make money, right? And here are my children. That's the most precious commodity. They're worth more than any money to me, right? So you know what he decides? Once he turns down the $500 million, he said, you know what? He says to his wife, you know what? I'm going to take 2 weeks off. He calls his boss. He says, you know what? I'm going to take 2 weeks off to spend 2 weeks with my children, this precious commodity that's worth more than any money. So the next day he goes out with his children and he goes to the park and he has a good time, and he tells them stories, and they play in the park. And for the first couple of hours, it's great. And then after the third or fourth hour, it starts getting a little bit tedious. And then they go home for supper, and it's a disaster. And then there's like, food all over the carpet, and it's a mess. And they go to bed, and it's like World War III. And this guy doesn't know what to do. It's really becoming a problem. So the end of the night, he's lying on the couch, and he tells his wife, you know what? Honey, do you think I was a little impetuous? That I told my boss that I needed 2 weeks off. You know what? I have a lot of work to do. Maybe it was a little irresponsible. You think maybe I should go back to work tomorrow morning? So what does this guy need? This guy needs a lesson, right? In love, right? How to love his children. He doesn't know how to do it. So this is what we all need. So we want to deal now, as we talked about definition, is what is the definition of love, right? So let's start from this angle, that everybody who gets married wants to get married because they're in love, right? Not because, God forbid, they're infatuated. But unfortunately, many people in our generation get married because they're infatuated, right? And then a few years down the line, you know what? The infatuation fields, and they feel, what am I doing in this relationship? So we need to understand the definition of love and infatuation so we can know the difference. So let's take you through this definition. So let's say you would have asked my mother of blessed memory, who was a wonderful, wonderful lady, and you would have asked her, tell me something about your son, Chaim. So you can imagine her saying, well, my son, he's warm, and he's caring, and he's responsible, and he's sensitive. And as she says these different virtues of her son, she would say, you can imagine her saying, and I love him. Why? Because when you see the virtues of another human being, and you identify that person with his or her virtues, that's when you feel a sense of love, right? That's what's infatuation, right? Infatuation is or let's go the other way before we get to infatuation. What's hate? Hate is the opposite, right? Hate is, if you see a person and you feel that, this person, he thinks he's God's gift to mankind. He's so egocentric. He's so selfish. When you identify a person with his or her faults, then you'll feel a sense of dislike. And if it's a very strong feeling, you'll feel a sense of hate, right? So you see what's infatuation? Infatuation is the gal goes to a party and she meets this guy, and such a good looking guy. And she comes from the party. She says, I met this guy, and he's so handsome, and he's so caring, and he's so strong, and he's so wonderful, right? So she feels like she's in love. Why? Because she's seeing what she thinks is all the virtues, and that's giving a feeling like love. Why isn't it love? Because you see, understand, is love blind? You see, who loves us the most in life? Who loves in general? Who loves us the most, generally speaking? You know who loves us the most? Generally speaking, our parents. Who gives us the most criticism? Generally speaking, our parents. But wait a second, Rabbi. I thought you told me if you love someone, you see the virtues. And if our parents love us the most, you're telling me they see the faults. So how does that make sense? So the answer, listen carefully, is that when you love someone, it's because you know them. You see the good and the bad, right? But you identify the person with the good, right? Not the bad, right? When you love, a parent loves their children because they know them. They see the good and the bad. When you see the good, right? You see, if you would ask my mother, well, isn't it true that your son, I heard all those virtues, but isn't it true that he's a little bit of a hypochondriac, and he's a little bit of a megalomaniac, and he's a little bit of a pyromaniac, isn't it true? So she said, yeah, well, but you know what? That's the way I brought him up. He doesn't mean to be that way. When you love someone, you see the virtues is the essence of who they are, and the faults is not who they mean to be, right? That's when you love someone. Identify someone with their with their virtues, and their faults isn't who they really are. And I'll just share with you very quickly. I know we're going to go a few minutes over, but when I was in yeshiva in Aish Torah, I remember there was a guy that I couldn't stand, because every time he came into the room, I would feel he's so selfish. And then I felt a sense of dislike and even hatred for him. It was before Rosh Hashanah. He came to me and he said, Chaim, I want to ask you as a friend. He said to me, Chaim, you know what? I have this selfish tendency and I don't know what to do about it. Can you give me any advice on what you could do? And I want to tell you, I was completely humbled, because at that moment I realized this isn't who he is. He isn't a selfish person. He's fighting against it. He wants to get out of it. He's trapped by it. We all have our faults. We all have our inadequacies, and that's who we are. The essence of a person is his virtues, and he's struggling against his faults. That's why I have a mitzvah to love every Jew and love every person, right? Even obnoxious people. That's the mitzvah. Why? Because even obnoxious people, their parents love them because they see the virtues and they excuse them for their faults. Not that they're not responsible, but we see that's not the essence of who they are. So the essence of loving a person is the definition is to see a person, when you identify a person with his or her virtues, right? And you realize that's the essence of who they are and they're not their faults. That's the definition of love. And I want to finish with an addendum, which you have in your sheets, that you see, and I just want to finish before we get to the addendum, but remember, with when you're infatuated with a person, you think, how do you know the difference between love and infatuation? See, when you're infatuated, you think the person is perfect. I met the perfect guy. I met the perfect girl. But the reason why you think they're perfect is because, you know what, you don't really see it clearly. You just want to feel that they're wonderful people, but you don't really know them. You just met them. You just met him. You want to believe that he's so virtuous. But the reality is that you don't really know him. When you love someone, it's because you know them, right? According to the knowledge is the love, right? As Rabbi Weinberg used to say, if you think you met the perfect gal, run 1,000,000 miles, because there's no such thing. No one's perfect. You're not in love. You're infatuated. You want to believe it, right? Now, the addendum is, imagine you saw a person walking down the street with one arm, right? I know you see that, I've seen it many times in my life. You're walking in the street and you see a person, they have one arm, one leg, or they have an arm with clippers at the end. It's painful. It's painful to see. It's very hurtful. I have a visceral reaction when I see that. Wow, it hurts because you feel their pain. Imagine if I said to you, ladies, you know what? You see that guy who's walking down the street? You know what? Wow, I hate that guy. Can you imagine if I said that? You'd say, Rabbi Samson, what kind of humanity do you have? How can you hate a person who's just got a problem like that? That's disgusting. So now I ask you, ladies, what's worse to go through life? To go through life with one arm, or to go through life with a big ego? Now think about it. I know a lady, a wonderful, wonderful lady who has one arm. A wonderful lady. She does amazing things. She speaks to people about how life is so beautiful and what she does and how she's changing the whole world, this lady. She's a wonderful lady. But if you go through life with an ego, a big ego, you know what? You're going to have problems being happy because nothing's ever good enough for me. I deserve more. And you won't listen to other people because what are they going to teach me? I know better than them. And you're going to have problems with your wife because, you're going to listen to her, and you're going to have problems with your boss. And more than that, you're going to have problems with God because this world isn't big enough for the both of us, because, who does he think he is? I'm not going to admit there's such a thing as a God because I'm number one, right? What's worse? To go through life, it's much worse. So imagine you see a guy walking down the street with a big ego. How are you going to react to him? You're going to say, I hate the guy? That's even worse than hating someone with one arm, right? I'm not saying he should be your best friend. Choose your friends wisely, but don't condemn people for their faults, right? Have compassion on people. Somebody's got a big ego and is selfish. You're going to feel, oh, what a poor guy. I really wish he understood how to have a good life. He just doesn't understand. He's just caught up in his own issues. Poor guy. Don't hate people for their faults. Don't condemn people for their faults. That's the mistake that we all make. Have compassion on them. Realize the essence of this person, just like his mother would do, is that he's a good person. He's struggling against the issues that he has, right? Love people. The essence of love is to see the virtues of another human being, identify that person with his or her virtues. So those are what we've taken care of today. What we've got through is the fifth level pleasure, physical pleasure and material pleasure, definition of happiness. And the next level pleasure, which is the pleasure of love and the definition of love. Next time we're going to get to, in 2 weeks' time, we'll get to the top 3 level pleasures of what's even greater than what most people think is their greatest pleasure in life, which is love. The Judaism says that's just child stuff. That's kids' play. We're going to get to really serious pleasures in the next class. So we have 2 idea shares for you, which we sent. Try to give over these idea shares. They're so profound, not just to give to others, which is also wonderful to do, but so that you'll internalize it. That you internalize the definition. We gave over the definition of happiness and the definition of love. Take these sort of one page type ideas and try to give it over at the Shabbos table, give it over to a friend on the telephone, give it over to your husband, give it over to someone, your children, give it over to some friend, and just give it over. Even if you just read what I've said, I gave it over almost word for word the way that I said it. Take it, and the greatest beneficiary will be you. That you will learn these ideas and internalize them. And we need these so much for ourselves. So thank you so much, everybody. And thank you for listening. If anybody has any questions, I don't know if I can, if Elisa, you can unmute, but if you have any questions, I'm available for the next few minutes before I get back to the men's reunion. But please let me know. Stephanie, thank you so much. It was so nice to see you last night. Jenny, thank you. Jenny Levin, thank you for being on our Tisha B'Av. Karina, nice to see you last night. Thank you. Thank you. And your sister-in-law. And so thank you. Karen Kaplan, I see you there. Is your hands up? I don't know if that means you have a question. But,
no, I don't. I don't know, but hello. I don't know.
And nice to see you, Carol. Carol Drucker in Miami, in Florida, excuse me. Thank you. Thank you, Carol. Such a pleasure. And we're missing you tonight at the reunion. And Idana Desagnik, thank you so much for joining us from Teaneck, New Jersey. And I'm in the reunion now with your husband, Lloyd, who I love so much. And there's no one who has a handshake like your husband, Lloyd. His handshake is the best in the world. Yes. Someone has a question? Okay. All right. I don't hear any questions, so I'll just end the night. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to email me. And it's great to have. I didn't really see you all, but I thank you for joining. We'll see you again for the top 3 levels in 2 weeks' time. And please share the idea shares. Have a wonderful, wonderful night.
Oh.